Good day everyone and welcome to my Magicka Sorcerer PvP guide for Scribes of Fate, update 38. It's been a while since I've made one of these guides, but with the recent Masterwork buff, this class has become playable again, so I picked it up and I'm having fun with it once more. The specific buff I'm talking about here is the 17% shield size increase for Hardened Ward, and this skill now scales of the highest of your Magicka or health. There's also a buff to Mage's Wrath, the other morph of Endless Fury, but that one is basically inconsequential for Masterwork PvP, as you don't have any other good cleave damage to combine that with, and you try to focus down single targets. Next to that, this skill is also still mediocre and serves more as a burst skill than a finisher. You might also be wondering how a single shield buff suddenly makes Masterwork good again. The answer to that is that it doesn't, but in my opinion it pushes Masterwork over a tipping point of playability where it's no longer absolute bottom tier, but it is still only mediocre at best. That's enough for me though, and that's also why I'm making these guides again. So with this quick introduction on the state of this spec for Scribes of Fate, I'll present the builds that I like to run this patch for NoCP and CP Cyrodiil, IC and Battlegrounds. As always, these builds and many more for all other classes can be found in a written version on my website, ESO-pvp-builds.com, see description, and there is accompanying gameplay that you can find in the other videos on my channel. Now for the setups, first off I'm going to make a division in these builds based on what you stack, maximum Magicka or maximum health, to get a decent shield size. That also means that all builds will have Hardened Ward, since the buff to Masterwork happened there, and your other healing options like pets and such are still absolute trash tier. Starting off with the classic maximum Magicka stack that I like the most, the setup that I run for CP Cyrodiil and Battlegrounds is 5 Wretch Vitality on the back bar, on the front bar 5 Crafty Alfiq, 2 pieces of Chuden as the monster set, 1 piece Trainee and Death Dealer's Feet to finish it off. The traits on this are all impenetrable and then ideally reinforced on the cuirass. I have well fitted still and I didn't bother to change it yet, that will work fine as well anyway. And then on the jewelry I have 3 arcane, and then on the front bar I have a charged trait, and on the back bar I have a defending trait. I have the escapist poison as always on the back bar. This is really nice for defense and allows you to defend yourself with ease when you're unstoppable, and also allows you to cast Dark Conversion without being interrupted when this poison is active. On the front bar I have a poison damage enchant. This together with the charge trait is going to give me a nice bit of an extra dot on the enemy, just a bit of a proc with extra damage if you want to call it that. You can also run an absorb stamina glyph here, that will give you a minor breach on the target, which is 3k extra penetration. That's something you want to do if you find your penetration is too low. And then the enchants on the gear are all maximum Magicka. The damage enchants here on the jewelry are the most stat dense thing you can get now, because they added a little line of Magicka recovery on the spell damage enchants and stamina recovery on the weapon damage enchants. So ideally on any build you want to run some kind of weapon damage or spell damage glyph on your jewelry. Here this can be done as well, especially because our sustain is already taken care of by Wretch Vitality anyway. And this will give us quite a bit of about 600 buffed extra weapon damage, which is quite significant when it comes to the damage that this build can deal. And it's definitely a change from the usual tri-stat sustain or just Magicka sustain chance that we ran on Sorcerer before. In order to alleviate for that loss of sustain and chance, I do have some other tricks as well that I will go over here with the skills. So starting off with the skills, on the front bar I have Streak, you always want to have this of course, Crystal Fragments, Crushing Shock, Hardened Ward, Mage Light and Inner Light as ultimate energy overload. And then on the back bar I have Elemental Drain, Critical Surge, Resolving Vigor, Haunting Curse, Dark Conversion and Temporal Guard. So starting off with the front bar here, remember that we have a charge trait from the Inferno Staff that is also going to proc the status effect of the fire damage, frost damage and shock damage from Crushing Shock, which gives you another bit of nice debuffs and damage. This bar is also where I have the most maximum Magicka. I have Crafty Alfiq here on the front bar, combine that with Inner Light, and that's how we get about 45k unbuffed maximum Magicka on the front bar. It will go higher when Death Dealer's Feet comes in to about 47.5 to 48k. So this creates a pretty big Hardened Ward, especially because this build has quite a decent amount of resistances as well. And it will also boost our damage, so many of our damage skills So all the damage we have is going to be active, is going to deal damage when we're on the front bar, and is just going to benefit from that large amount of extra magicka that we have here. That counts for Crushing Shock, Crystal Fragments, Streak, and Energy Overload. But it also counts for Curse, because usually when I open up, I do a Curse and then I switch to the front bar. So then the Curse will explode on the front bar and take those stats together with the other skills here. Then on the back bar, Hardened Ward is our main defensive skill, of course, but when we have that active under that, we heal with Resolving Vigor, which is a really good heal over time that you want on basically all PvP builds. And it also grants you Minor Resolve on top of that, so it's very dense in the amount of benefits that it gives, further increasing your resistances here as well. And then on top of that, we also have Critical Surge. This on one hand is going to give you another bit of healing over time, especially when you're on the offensive, which allows you to stay on the offensive for longer as well. This, by the way, is also because you have Hardened Ward, so you can stay on the offensive and cast a Hardened Ward every now and then you still have your Critical Surge ticking too. But on top of that, Critical Surge is also going to give you Major Sorcery. And Major Sorcery is going to be combined with the Inner Light passive of Major Prophecy. And that means you don't need to run Spell Power Potions anymore. And then you can run Tri-Step Potions or Minor Heroine Potions even if you have much gold. And then you can have a lot more sustain through that than you would usually through Spell Power Potions. So that's a nice benefit of this skill layout. This also means that you don't have Major Prophecy on the back bar, but you don't really need that either. And then lastly, for the skill on the back bar, we have Elemental Terrain. This is for a necessary amount of penetration, because this build base penetration is pretty low, so you do need this skill. And on top of that, it is also going to give you Minor Magicka Steal, which is a boost to your sustain that I do like to have. You can also run Elemental Susceptibility here. I've tried that as well. The benefit of that is that you're going to have more of those status effect procs, but they did nerf it this patch to the point where it only procs status effects once every 7.5 seconds. And I proc those a lot anyway because I have a charged front bar staff with Crushing Shock. So it's a bit of a trade-off you need to make between a decent boost to Magicka sustain or a small boost to your damage. Next to that, this is also your source of a major buff or debuff for Resh Vitality, so it is important to cast the skill once every 15 to 20 seconds to keep your Resh Vitality proc active. And then for the two ultimates, on the front bar I have Energy Overload. Usually I have Power Overload here, and that works well too, but the reasoning here is a bit similar to what I had with Elemental Terrain, where Power Overload is a little bit more damage than Energy Overload, not that much. It's about, I think, a 1k tooltip difference. But the thing is that this morph also gives you 1200 Magicka and Stamina, which is a big amount of resource that you get back for every light attack. That allows you to stay on the offensive for longer as well. You don't need to go to the back bar to cast Dark Conversion or anything, and it generally makes it a lot easier to weave in and out of Overload and PvP and 1vx that way for a minor loss in damage really. So that's what I like to run here now. Then on the back bar, Temporal Guard, a classic. So if you are in trouble, you have your oh shit button here, you just cast Temporal Guard and then you pray to the gods that it will work. And then also you have Minor Protection here on the back bar, which is nice, just a small buff on top of that. And that is part of your defense as well. So as I said before, this build has decent survivability combined to most master builds, and that's of course due to the fact that we have Minor Resolve from Vigor, but we also have a one-piece resistances from Mighty Tudun, which is nice. And on top of that, this build also has 5 medium armor, so that also increases not only the weapon damage and the crit damage, but it also increases the resistances a bit. And it's all these nice little things that add up together to create a build with decent resistances. Not great, obviously, it's not like 30k or anything, but it will be pushing towards that, which is nice to have on the Sorcerer. It'll protect you from sudden incaps and large amounts of damage that you didn't see incoming. And then for the rest, you still have your usual mobility skill streak that is absolutely important to use for your survivability. And then lastly on this build for the champion points, I have in the blue tree Mastered Arms, Weapon Expert, Deadly Aim and Ironclad. And then on the red tree I have Sustained by Suffering, Pain's Refuge, Bastion and Survival Instincts. I don't have Arcanist Supremacy on the blue tree here. You can have about 48k Magicka without even running that, which is super nice about a build like this. But you can also run it if you want instead of probably Mastered Arms or Ironclad. This is just if you like to see the 50k Magicka stats on when you're fully buffed up with Death Dealer's Feet as well. But otherwise, when it comes to having the most amount of stats, I do recommend the CP setup. Weapons Expert is also going to be a big buff to your light attacks and to Overload, obviously. And that's a big part of your damage, and it's a very big damage modifier as well of 20%, and that gives you a lot of extra burst when you have your ultimate active, and that's how you score kills after all, so it is nice to have this CP passive as well. And then one more thing is the auxiliary stuff from this build. So as always, you want to have all your attributes into Magicka for this. Your health will still be around 30k once you have the Expert Summoner passive and Death Dealer's Feet active. And then for the Mantis, I have the Mage. Vampire Stage 3, always use that in PvP. With Sugar Skulls as well. And then as a race, I am a High Elf, but all the classic Sorc races will work, so Breton or Dark Elf would also work. When you're on a Dark Elf though, I would suggest switching to Arteum Pickled Fishbowl instead of with Sugar Skulls, simply because otherwise you'll have an overkill on the amount of maximum stamina. With this build already, you'll be around 20k when Death Dealer's Feet is active. So the last thing to mention for this build is the front bar set here, Crafty Elfique. This is one that I like to use here simply because I like to see the high amount of maximum Magicka, and it is also beneficial of course for extra defense from Hardened Ward and extra damage from my offensive skills, but it is not the only set you can run here. Another good option here would be Drogekin. Drogekin would be the set you should run here if you want to maximize your damage output. This is by far still the best damage set you can get on a Max Sorc, and you can use the exact same skill layout with a charged poison damage enchant as well. There's also Rallying Cry. Rallying Cry is a bit similar to Crafty Elfique in the sense that it will give you both damage and damage reduction. So here you get 300 weapon and spell damage and a bunch of critical resistance. I wouldn't change my trait on this. I would keep them impenetrable on the gear as well. Usually when you run Rallying Cry, you use that to run Divines or something else on your gear. But here I would keep the impenetrable simply because you have a lot of crit resistance, and many people also have a lot of crit damage, so you're not going to reach the cap in terms of that yet. I have also made a version of this build for no CP. And the setup is very similar in the sense that I will still have that front bar set Crafty Elfique, which is a set that works in no CP Cyrodiil. And then combined with that Crafty Elfique, I have Torx Pact on the back bar. Torx Pact is also a set that will work in no CP, and I've combined that with a Magicka Return glyph. So basically this will take the role of Fresh Vitality in the sense that it's a back bar sustain boost. Here it is purely focused on Magicka sustain, so I do have a little bit of more sustain glyph for stamina on the jewelry. Here you can see 1 stamina recovery and 1 try recovery enchantment. The last enchantment is still weapon damage though, so you're not losing that much weapon damage. And on top of that, Stork's Pact is also going to give you a little bit more defense with the 2 armor lines and the maximum health line, which is nice to have for no CP, since I always do find that my Sorc in no CP is a bit tougher to play. And then, as before, I've combined that with the 1-piece Trainee and the 2-piece Mighty Tudor. So as you can see, it's a very similar build in terms of layout. I simply replaced Fresh Vitality with Torx Pact, and I've replaced the Death Dealer's Feet Mythic, which doesn't work in OCP Cyrodiil, by Torque of Soul and Constancy. This is a nice sustain boost, does work in OCP as well, and it's definitely going to help because that's the main thing you lose in OCP compared to CP, is the sustain passes from CP. And this will help you get that back on point again. But combine this with Torx Pact and you definitely have enough sustain, especially with the tricks I mentioned before with Energy Overload and Elemental Drain. The damage you have is still pretty similar because you're still using the same setup with Crafty Elfique and you still have a weapon damage glyph left too. And then on the resistances side, you'll be good to go too, since you'll have the exact same resistance with Minor Resolve from Resolving Vigor and Mighty Tudor, and then of course you also have the same amount of maximum Magicka unbuffed, so your shield size is still decent too. You do lose a bit of health and stamina as well due to not using Death Dealer's Feet, but that's not too much of a problem because you do have 27k health unbuffed with the Torx Pact 3-piece bonus here. And your maximum stamina is not that big of an issue, as long as it's around or above 17k, you're fine to go. Everything above that, to be fair, is kind of overkill, unless if you have a really hybrid build on your Sorcerer, but here the only stamina skills are Vigor and Dark Conversion, so having a high stam pool allows me to cast that with ease and roll dodge with ease, but I really don't need anything more than about 17 to 18k. Lastly, for the Magicka builds, I'll mention the classic shield stack build I made last patch, which was 5 pieces of Drogekin, 1 piece Bound Tusk, 1 piece Magma Incarnate, 2 pieces of Trainee, Death Dealer's Feet, Restoration Backbar Staff of Willpower, and the Assailant's Perfected Inferno Staff. That's a build you can see in the video I made then if you want, but I'm not running that anymore now. It is, unlike the builds I'm presenting right now, an old 5 light armor build with 3 shields. That's a lot like the older sword playstyle, and it is still what I would recommend if you want to try out a shield stacking setup like that. But as I said, I don't run it myself anymore, simply because building a bit tankier with medium armor, and vigor and so on with 1 shield is just preferable when it comes to survivability and damage. Despite being squishier than medium armor, light armor also doesn't offer any better passives for damage either. The crit chance passive is paralleled by the crit damage passive on medium armor, and the penetration passive is paralleled by the spell damage boost from medium armor. Then next up we have the so-called health sork builds, as in the setups where you stack health and you get your hardened ward to scale off of that. First I'll show you the build I use for this, then I'll discuss the differences a bit with Magicka setups. So here with this build unbuffed, the health is about 37k. Buffed up, this is going to be about 43k, together with Death Dealer's Feet and Expert Summoner and all that. So the shield size is similar to what you would get on many Magicka stack builds as well. For example, the previous build, if you would run Drogekin instead of Alfik on my Magicka build that I run this patch. The sets in this build are 5 pieces of Drogekin on the front bar, 5 pieces of Mara's Balm on the back bar, again 2 pieces of Chuden or for the monster set, and then 1 piece Trainee together with Death Dealer's Feet. The traits are mostly impenetrable except for reinforced on the armor again. You could also try some well fitted if you want, if you struggle a bit with your stamina sustain, but there are some boosts in sustain that I have here too, which should help. The traits on the jewelry are 2 infused and 1 bloodthirsty. You can also go 3 infused for maximum healing, or maybe more bloodthirsty if you want to maximize your damage. On the front bar I have again a charged poison damage enchant, and on the back bar I have an infused weapon damage enchant. So I'll start off with this here actually. The infused weapon damage enchant is one of the many ways I have on this build to improve the damage, because that's one of the things I'm mainly focusing on when it comes to a health sork. And this is basically something that will be up a lot of the time, permanently if you constantly swap between back bar and front bar, so it is important to do that. You can also run defending again as a trait with the escapist poison to maximize your defense, but I do find that with this amount of maximum health, the healing you have, and with Mara's Balm, you have enough healing and you can afford to drop some extra survivability for more damage, which is what I'm doing here. Drogekin is with a similar mindset of just purely increasing the damage again. Like as I said before, it's a really good damage set for my sork. But then the last set, Mara's Balm, is definitely not for a damage increase. This one is focused purely on survivability. I will explain that a bit more in a second. The enchants on the armor are all tri-stat enchants, compared to the previous build, which was with 5 medium armor, 1 light and 1 heavy. Here I have 2 light armor, 3 heavy and 2 medium. It's a bit of a mix of all the different armor weights, as I do need a mix of all these things in this build as well. I want survivability from heavy armor, and I have to do some heavy armor too with Mara's Balm. I have the damage from medium and light armor, and I also have a bit of stamina sustain from medium armor and magic sustain from light armor. I would definitely recommend putting the light armor on the sash and the gloves, since those have the lowest armor value anyway for the item. So it's not as much of a drawback as if you were to run light armor on one of the other pieces like Sabatons or especially the chest. Then for the skill setup, I have something that's actually quite similar to the previous build too, because again on the front bar I have the setups 3 Crystal Fragments, Crushing Shock. Here I have Camouflaged Hunter instead of Mage Light, but the idea is the same. You will boost your damage with Minor Berserk, but you will also get Major Prophecy, so you can run tri-stat potions, because you also get Major Sorcery from Critical Surge. As an ultimate, Energy Overload again. This is because I want to boost my sustain a bit. The sustain on this build is a bit tougher than on the previous build with Fresh Vitality, but you should be able to manage it with Energy Overload and Elemental Drain, which again here is going to provide the necessary penetration and also give me some extra sustain. Then for the other skills on the back bar, as I mentioned, Critical Surge, it's a nice bit of healing. It's not affected by your weapon or spell damage either, so you can just have a constant amount of healing in here. Resolving Vigor, you can see the tooltip is quite a bit lower than in the previous build, so it's going to heal for less, but it is still necessary. Then Hardened Ward, Dark Conversion, and Temporal Guard. The idea is the same as the previous build, where you have Hardened Ward as your main defense, only now it scales at maximum health, and you heal underneath that with Vigor, Crit Surge, and Dark Conversion. For the champion points in this build, on the blue tree I have Master at Arms, Weapons Expert, Deadly Aim, and Ironclad, and on the red tree Sustained by Suffering, Pain's Refuge, Bastion, and Survival Instincts. I've gone over these again, but they are the same as in the previous build, the Magicka setup, so I won't explain them here. And then for the auxiliary stuff, I have all points into maximum health now instead of maximum Magicka. This is necessary to get a decent shield size for this build. As I mentioned before, you will have well over 40k health. The maximum Magicka unbuffed and maximum stamina unbuffed are rather low too, but you do have Death Dealer's Feet, so you'll end up well over 20k maximum Magicka and about 17.5k maximum stamina. The sustain, the base sustain, is a lot higher than the previous build because we don't have any extra boosts like Wedge Vitality here, with the magic recovery of 1.6k and stamina recovery of 1.1k. You do have extra sustain boosts from Energy Overload and Elemental Terrain as well, and that way you can sustain just fine in 1vx situations. So for that larger amount of base sustain here, I'm doing that with Orzorga's Smoked Bear Haunch or Jewels of Misru if you want to have a cheaper food, and then with Mundus the Atronach. It can be switched out to other monsters as well if you feel like pushing your damage a bit higher with, for example, the Apprentice or the Lover. But I go with the Atronach because I do need that extra bit of sustain in 1vx situations specifically. Vampire Stage 3 as always, and as a race again High Elf, Dark Elf or Breton are best for this. Now on this build too there are alternative sets to consider and that I tried as well here, and those are Wedge Vitality, Rallying Cry and Robes of the Hist. The latter is a good replacement for Mara's Balm as it has more healing over time at the cost of the Purge and the burst heal from Mara's Balm, but it does force you into running at least 4 light armor. I do tend to avoid running too much light armor because of how squishy it is, and as I mentioned before, its damage bonuses don't really weigh up to, for example, medium armor or survivability from heavy armor. Wedge Vitality is an easy fix for sustain that I used in the Maximum Magicka build as well, and it was a great help on this build too, because then I could push more damage with the food and the Mundus and all that. But the thing is, with this amount of health, like about 43k, I do need an additional boost in healing, more than what I can get through the skill setup. Without something like Mara's Balm or Robes of the Hist, I struggle to get my health back up after taking a serious amount of damage, so I always include one of these sets, preferably Mara's Balm, in this build. Another problem that this build has is that damage is not the highest. Don't get me wrong, it's definitely good damage, you have a good amount of spell damage and such, and with a stack of Overload there's no problem in this regard, but it does absolutely require Drawrigan for me. Without it I just have too little damage, so even though alternatives exist, I do feel forced into using Mara's Balm and Drawrigan on this build. So compared to the Maximum Magicka setups, these kinds of health stalks are definitely tanky, especially given that I feel forced to run a healing set on top of that, and they are more forgiving, much more forgiving, since you have to mess up a lot to suddenly lose about 40k health. On top of that, it's not difficult to build good sustain and keep good damage on them too, making it a good option, especially if you're making mistakes every now and then, or if you just want to relax and not pay attention to everything all the time. The Maximum Magicka build has the potential to offer more damage, and it also can offer the same survivability and sustain if you pay attention, if you play well. So that's what I will mostly go for, since I can do that and I like the feeling of having more damage than just a classic Maximum Magicka setup. But I will have videos with the health setup as well that you can watch on my channel that I will upload later after this guide. But that's it for the builds. I will be using Dispatch. So on one hand we have the Magicka stack, we have the Magicka stack for no CP, and we have the health sork. That's like the 3 main things that I use. If you're looking for more builds for Hybrid Sorcerer or for Stamina Sorcerer, I have those written down on my website as well, just like builds for all the other classes, so feel free to check that out. I hope this guide will be helpful though for the Magicka Sorcerer side of things, and I hope I might inspire you to try your Master again as well. Maybe try some new builds yourself or some variations, since it can be playable again now. I've got to admit, it's been a while that I've seen a lot of Master content on YouTube, and I've missed playing this class. If you have any questions, feel free to put those in the comment section here, or you can join my Discord server, where I'm always quick to respond as well. If you want to support this kind of content, the easiest way to do this is by checking out some other videos on my channel or by subscribing. If you want to go further than that, I also have a Patreon on which I give back benefits like additional builds, custom builds on request, gameplay reviews, coaching sessions and more. And lastly, I thank you for watching this video. I hope you'll have a good one and you'll have fun playing Masterwork. See ya!